You're listening to a special presentation from notlp.com. We're inviting Michael Neel, the creator of Infinite Santa 8000, to the show to share his favorite Christmas movies. Infinite Santa 8000 is now available on Blu-ray from Synapse Films. Oh, hear that? The sleigh bells ringing for you, Michael?
Ho, ho, ho. Something good's going to happen with sleigh bells, or terrible. You never know. Depends on who's doing it.
This is for true. So Infinite Santa 8000, I've seen several times, most recently at Whorehound Weekend here in Cincinnati. That was a really good time.
Yeah, that was awesome. It was great to see you. Great to see it with a crowd.
Yeah. Now I've been following the trajectory of this. Now this is like, I would say almost feels like it's your life's work right now, right?
Yeah, it definitely feels like that. It started as a web series in 2010 that Greg Anson and I did together. We're about 9 months. Didn't really know what we were doing. Actually, didn't know what we were doing at all. I had a little experience in animation, mostly stop motion, and we just kind of figured it out. Lucked into an art style with some of the people who did special effects for a drive-in horror show, and one of whom had tattooed me a bunch and still does. And we just we put it out. It seemed to strike a chord with people, and we thought, let's make a feature. And instead of doing it normally, let's increase the amount of work we have to do by just 1,000%. And because you figure if you make a movie, you got to make it bigger and better. I mean, that's usually the rule if you adapt something from a small format. So it was very ambitious. Again, we ran in blind. There were tons of techniques like hand-to-hand combat, flying, and stuff that I had a sense about how we should do, but I didn't really know. But I was like, it's never really stopped me from doing something before. Generally speaking, it works out. I kind of feel like as an artist, you deserve the right to fail, because if you don't take a risk, you won't do anything. The difference with us is that if we fail, it's public, so people can see it and tell us, and they will. But yeah, we worked on it for 3 years and released it in 2013. But in order to make our deadline, we had to cut a bunch of stuff because we were just running out of time. So the version we released was great. I was really proud of it, but it wasn't the finished one. So over the years afterwards, I went back and animated everything we'd cut. There's a big dialogue scene, a bunch of hand-to-hand combat, a couple other things, basically stuff that took a long time. When we're looking at our big list, we're like, we need to finish it. And, either we have a shot that takes an hour or we have a scene that takes 3 weeks,
Yeah. I believe it. Animation is very tricky. Even with the tools that have come out since you've made this, which I want to ask you about that too. Like the technology has changed, and something like this feels like, to me, and I told you this before, it reminds me a lot of Liquid Television, the old MTV program, where it was handmade animation, and just it's got your fingerprints all over it. It's got grit. Obviously, you've mentioned there's fighting sequences.
It's just a couple.
Yeah, there's Santa Claus is in peril. It's in a post-apocalyptic world. Do you feel that have you done more animation since with any of the tools that exist now versus then, or is it something you've moved totally to live action now?
It's pretty much the same thing for animation. We're using After Effects that started in the late 90s or early 2000s. It's an animation software. Everyone has seen it without realizing it. If you ever watched a movie where they made, they did CGI extension of a city, or even like Secretariat, like only part of the audience was real. The rest was all like copied and pasted. Whenever someone talks about CGI, it's probably been brought into the live action shot and married together with After Effects. So it's often compositing, or if you see like funky, text or titles on the football, that's usually After Effects. But for us, we probably used it in the least like RAM intensive way possible. Or translation, for those of you that aren't computer people, basically used like 1% of what the program actually does. So our film and web series is a cyborg Santa Claus fighting mutants and robots in the year 8000 in a vast post-apocalyptic wasteland. So obviously, unless we have like $500 million, this is going to be animated. The tools are kind of neat because we can get everything hand drawn and then bring it in and move it almost like a marionette. And the computer does most of the drawing, in terms of like if you have Santa waving, you have his hand, by his chest, and then you place it, up next to his shoulder a second later, and the computer draws everything in between.
Oh, see, I had no idea about that. That's pretty amazing.
It's completely amazing considering the two of us animated this, Greg Anson and I. If it wasn't like that, we'd still be doing it,
Right.
14 years later. And the other thing it lets us do is that, we have like hordes of monsters and mutants, and it's like, giant battle scenes. And once you make one explosion or one blood splatter or one monster, you can basically copy and paste the same way you would in a Word document. And I'm not kidding. It's like we have like stock explosions and like gunfire and stuff.
Yeah.
We have this one gunfire flash we use every time. So that actually lets us really make our production value much bigger, as opposed to walking, which is really, really difficult in any medium of animation. If you notice, if you watch like Bob's Burgers in particular, or The Simpsons, whenever characters start to walk, it's almost always from the waist up. Bob's Burgers in particular, because it saves money. I'm saying that as a compliment, by the way. That's not a dig at them. That's smart. And it's actually why when I first watched Wallace and Gromit, and one of the earliest shots was Gromit or Wallace walking down the stairs, which is even harder in stop motion because I've done a little stop motion. I was like, dude, you're just showing off. Like, I never noticed how hard this is, and you're just, brushing it off.
Yeah, those Wallace and Gromit, anything, the Arden, right? Arden Studios, I think.
Yeah, Arden.
They're outstanding. So speaking of other movies besides Infinite Santa 8000, I asked you, I was really curious about this, what your top 5 holiday movies are. And they could be any genre. I know we usually cover sci-fi, fantasy, and horror, but I think this one should be open to anything. So do you want to do like 5, start at 5 and go down to 1? Your favorite?
Yeah.
All right.
I think so. So ranking these is a little tricky. And there's always a question of, is it a horror, holiday movie, or not? So for me, I think number 5 is probably Santa's Sleigh. And with Bill Goldberg playing an ass-kicking Santa Claus, like the opening scene is him killing all these obnoxious people, like, Chris Kattan and Fran Drescher and James Caan. And it's great. It's really funny. It's really graphic. It's very tongue-in-cheek. I love holiday horror. I feel like Christmas and horror, or Christmas and comedy, meld very well, because I think there's a lot of pressure and right word, I guess, stress that comes along, with the holiday. And something like horror or comedy kind of takes that away a little bit, lets you laugh at it. Or I feel like horror in particular really, mixes with it well. And that's a good segue to my next one. And I kind of can't believe I got to mix it up. Okay. Well, I'm going to put at number 4, Terrifier 3. And I know it's very new, and over time it'll probably rise on the list, if not for the ones in front of it.
That impressed the hell out of me, by the way. Like,
I thought, it's amazing.
I'm not even like somebody, like, to me, gore is fine and everything, but I'm not like a guy who seeks it out. I'm not. And I've heard, criticisms of the Terrifier series on the opposite side of that, saying, that it's, extreme for extreme's sake. But I disagree with that, because the style is so precise. And the fact that he has ramped up the absurdity of the concept from 1, 2, 3, and in even the other instances where he used that character, like, he ramped up the way movies would ramp up for us in the 80s, where the sequel had to plus the one before it and had to bring something wild into it. And he did that with 2 and 3 in a way that I was like, I really respect that. And it really reflects his influences. And it's colorful too, which more horror movies need to be colorful like that.
I completely agree. I feel like he realized after the first one that sadism will only get you so far, which the first one does very well. And then I didn't know for 2 what he's going to do. And there's all this fantasy stuff. There's almost like magic, it just went all out. And of course the gore. For me, the third one is really the kind of ultimate incarnation of art with this kind of sadism. And I love how in the film, I saw it twice in the theater, it starts off, slight spoilers for people that haven't seen it. It starts off in a very serious, scary mode, probably the scariest scene they've ever done. And also it's just a reference to And All Through the House, the Tales from the Crypt story that's been adapted twice, which he confirmed in an interview. So I was like, yes, you know, because he's definitely a horror nerd. Oh, totally. And then so it starts scary and then stays scary and unsettling. But then by the middle of it, it just starts to go bananas. And when Art gets obsessed with Santa Claus and it takes this funny, comedic, almost charming twist, like he's always been the kind of killer you want to root for. But I think for some people, it can be hard because he is so sadistic. You know, like Freddy Krueger is kind of cool. You know, it's easy. I mean, the first one, it's a little different, but he's a very likable villain in a lot of ways. Art, I think, intentionally pushes back at you, or rather Damien, I think, through the character. But by the time he's got those awesome Christmas sunglasses on and he's doing that infamous shower scene, which I'll let people discover for themselves. And like I was laughing hysterically. It's like, and then it gets weirder and weirder and weirder. I think it's so smart. Again, mixing it with Christmas, it really, you know, having Art dressed like Santa Claus, just really achieves something great.
Yeah, it was the moment I saw that still when they were leading up to the release, I was like, he was made for this. This character is up there. I mean, 50 million Elvis fans can't be wrong, right? Like you keep hearing Terrifier from horror fans, where the majority of horror fans are at least, you know, like that was great entertainment, if not saying that this is a new icon that belongs with all the big, you know, slasher characters. And yeah, definitely putting him in the Santa Claus suit is what I think sealed the deal for me. What's left, like, you know, Art the Clown in space, which sounds silly when we say it, but I have no doubt Damien Leone could make that movie and make it work.
Oh, I know. And then just the last thing quickly that I love is that an unrated, barely advertised film that was essentially negotiated from the small company with the big theaters goes out there, not only outperforms Joker 2 in its first run. As of today, it's made $88 million globally on a $2 million budget. I think anyone that loves independent horror, whether you like the films or not, should be cheering because this opens the door for everybody.
That's true.
It's and in a time where Hollywood is, you know, their big films they're really struggling. You know, horror always comes back. Horror is always there. It's always a savior, whether it's, you know, like theatrical films crashing, whether it's VHS, DVD, pick your format. Horrors. I mean, even Frankenstein. You know, that was a mega hit. So much that for Bride of Frankenstein and James Whale got a clean slate to do anything because they wanted it so badly.
You know, and it's such a similar story, really, in a lot of respects. Like what you're saying, the ability to go hog wild. That's something that the creator of Terrifier has in spades and built into his personality, I think. I do find it funny it beat Joker 2. So I don't know if that's like the first time two clown movies have been up against each other on opening weekend or not.
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
I mean, it can't be that many.
No, I wouldn't think so. You know, no telling. So we have 5 and 4 and we're on to 3.
Okay. The next 3 could really, any one of them could be number 1. I mean, if you like Christmas horror, Silent Night, Deadly Night is top for me. I mean, what's so amazing about it is, you know, the reputation was that it was really wrong, and it is. And I remember as a kid going to the video store and seeing this giant cardboard cutout around Christmas of the really infamous image of the chimney with Santa's arm, out of it, holding an axe, you know, as though he's going down the chimney to kill people. And I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. My parents were like,
hadn't seen anything like that growing up, really.
No,
that was out of that's nothing. When 80, what was that, 85, 84 or somewhere around there?
Yeah,
you got to think about, like, I remember the protests and that being a big reason as a little kid that I'm like, oh, what is this? It's on the nightly news and there are these parents lined up outside protesting a movie theater. That always just sparks my interest. You know, like, why don't you want me to see this thing?
Totally. And it deals with so many great taboos. And I remember, yeah, I really wanted to see it. My parents were like, "You are not seeing that movie." I was 9. I think we're about the same age.
Yeah.
Um, but what's great about it is, yes, it breaks the taboos, and like a lot of those early to mid '80s slashers, it really shoves your face in the kind of wrongness of it. But what I think is amazing, and I think what was cut out of the original unrated cut that was put back in, is everything about the psychological element. Because I feel sometimes whenever any film gets, you know, gets put in the crosshairs of moral people, it's not just the content; it's that it's done well. Like tons of people imitated Cannibal Holocaust, but Cannibal Holocaust is a really well-made movie. Like it's not just the gore. Tons of movies are gory. A lot of stuff afterward, the Cannibal Ferox and stuff. Like, yeah, it's good, but it's limited by the movie itself. Or like Serbian film or Martyrs or something. Like, there's a lot of films like Martyrs, but there's only one Martyrs, and I don't know if I want to see it again. But it's like
Right. Yeah.
it's like an A+. It's the
Yeah.
best you can do that, you know. And I feel like by taking the psychological parts out of Silent Night, Deadly Night, you actually make it almost worse because it seems so senseless. But everything they cut out is everything with the character going nuts and the slow transition into insanity, which, you know, it builds tension. But I think it's very telling that that's what the rating system didn't want, or the ratings board, because it makes you feel empathy for him.
Yeah.
And that's a problem if you don't like this kind of stuff. I mean, the bottom line is, if you don't like horror, they're not going to like anything. And
Yeah.
I know they had to cut some gore too, but most of it was character things. And I talked with Brian Wilson, at the star of it at Horror Hound, 10 years ago maybe, and we were talking about that. He said, yeah, he said, and we didn't realize that was going to be a problem. We thought we were making a thriller, you know, not
Yeah.
even horror. And I know that can be a splitting hairs a little bit, especially with people in the horror world. I know I kind of roll my eyes when I hear that, but I think from his point of view, it makes sense. He was thinking of it as a tragedy. You know, I
Right.
think his point was, it's not, you know, Friday the 13th Part 4, which I love, but isn't really tragic. It's more kind of fun and scary. You know,
Yeah.
like Silent Night, Deadly Night, it's a legitimately serious movie.
It shows like the connection to the OG, like Robert Bloch Psycho in you know the book and the movie, where you have a character where in horror sometimes they don't the trauma that makes the hurt, you know, they say hurt people. It's
Yeah.
never more true than in a lot of slasher films, where like you have a young character, like in, whether it be in Silent Night, Deadly Night, or a character like Norman Bates, or the guy from Pieces. You know, like,
Yeah.
like all these characters in Silent Night, Deadly Night, there's a moment that is very much what happens in the lives of real killers. You know, they can almost go back to some childhood trauma, and I think that was really interesting the way they addressed that so boldly in that movie, and it's so raw. You know, why he's
Yeah.
the way he is. It's kind of believable in that way.
Yeah, it really is. And I find that's why it's so good,
Yeah.
you know. Yeah.
Yeah. Plus, I love the toy store.
Oh, it's so good. And that isn't that the one? Is that the one with the song "Santa's Loving, Santa's Creeping"? Da, da, da.
I think
It's
so.
got this
Yeah.
like, right. It's got this great double meaning where like it sounds like, you know, it's Santa
Yeah.
watching you and giving you presents, but what it really is Santa watching you and getting ready to kill you with an axe if you're naughty.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I always felt there was something spooky about not just Santa, but that he knows when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake. Santa Claus is coming to town, right? Is that the song I'm thinking of? Uh, it's just kind of a spooky thing. The idea of a man coming into your home in the dead of winter at night while you're asleep. Oh man.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's actually a good segue to my next one. So it's it's the best film I've seen about the creepiness of Santa, if you take him literally, and it's Christmas Evil.
Oh yeah.
I just love it. You know, and what I mean is, you know, that's another one of, you know, trauma that really, you know, sets someone off. I can't remember if that's a sexual trauma in that or not. I'm
Yeah,
getting a little confused with
is
other
he
ones.
really like in that one? Isn't he a real severe alcoholic too? Am I thinking of a different movie? I might be.
I think it's a different one. He's obsessed with Santa Claus and Christmas, and he works in a toy factory. And part of his mental instability is that he feels like he needs to be Santa Claus. So instead of seeing what you're, knowing when you're bad or good from magic, he knows even bad or good because he gets on a roof nearby with high-powered binoculars and watches you through a window, and then writes in the big book whether you've been naughty or not. Um,
Oh,
it stars one of the guys from Sesame Street.
oh, I didn't make that
Um,
connection.
yeah, and I think it's 1980. It might be late 70s.
No, you're right.
I'm
1980.
blanking.
I just pulled
Yeah,
it
all
up because
right.
I was trying to jog my memory. But yeah,
Yeah,
he was an older actor too, which is
yeah,
pretty different from in Silent Night, Deadly Night you're dealing with a young man, but this is a different perspective on everything.
yeah, and it's really great because it gets into that idea of Santa judging people, but the character is also flawed. Like there's an amazing scene, slight spoilers, people, where he finally cracks and dresses up as Santa Claus. And what's great too, that you know, it's so I always felt like in Halloween, the only thing they could have done more is have Michael Myers or the Shape walk around more with trick or treaters because you just don't know.
Yeah.
Like Trick or Treat, the film did that really well. The new one, or even Halloween 2, the beginning. He gets to walk around, and in this one, when the guy finally cracks, he gets a bunch of toys and goes out and actually gives them to people, and
Yeah.
he is a good Santa Claus. But then he's at a party because he gets invited inside, and it's all tense because you're like, is he going to kill everybody? What's going to go on? And they're dancing and everything. And then some kids come up to him, and he said, "You're going to be good." They say, "Yeah, Santa." And he says, "You better be, because if you're not, Santa's going to bring you something terrible." And
Yeah.
then he just stops, and it's just like I'm not doing it justice, but it's like it just hangs in the air. And after seeing so many of these Christmas horror movies, like I can't think of another one that really achieves that. Even Silent Night, Deadly Night, for as twisted as it is, like this seems like real mental illness
Yeah.
and instability, and you care for him, but you're just like, get that guy the hell out of there. Something horrible is going to happen.
Yeah, he's a ticking time bomb. Yeah, like you said, it's chilling. You want it to turn out okay. You're like, maybe he's turning
Yeah,
over a new leaf.
yeah,
I
right.
I was pulling this up kind of to refresh my memory, look at the the cast list and stuff. And the piece of trivia, the very first piece of trivia on IMDb is this is John Waters' favorite Thanksgiving / Christmas themed film.
Yep.
So you're in good company.
Oh yeah. No, I love it. It's a must watch. I have a Blu-ray of it. It's great, especially if you like that early 80s, late 70s sleaze that those
Yeah.
golden age slashers have a lot of,
I was trying to
not big
look
budgets, stuff like that.
where they filmed Christmas Evil. Do you remember that? Because I was trying to pull it up because for me, especially in the early 80s, I feel like, yeah, New Jersey. There it is. I was
Yeah.
about to say, I
Yeah.
feel like it
Jersey.
was Jersey or New York, but yeah, they did some in New York too. So,
Yeah.
it's also like that snapshot of the same thing you get in Maniac and stuff, where you're getting to see like pre-Giuliani New York, and I think that's like a whole added layer that filmmakers wouldn't have known that so many years later that would be a huge flavor, because it was just the city they knew. But if you go back and look at the way things were in that part of the country in the 80s, this is night and day from where it is now.
Oh, for real. And one of the great things about doing any film, but especially indie film, is that, because that's a very much indie film, great locations go so far because you show up and you film it, and you're not there. He's not in Times Square adding, prostitutes and grime and, syringes and stuff. Like, it's just there. I don't remember if that's specifically in the film, but you know what I mean. I remember in one of these, there's a scene where he's stalking around the outside of someone's house, and there's like dirt on the outside. Like it looks like the kind of house my friends lived in growing up, and not that they lived in a seedy area, but it looks lived in.
Yeah.
Like, I think an art director would make it look too nice.
Yeah, I don't think they did anything on sets for this movie.
I would doubt it. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
a little bit, but
Yeah.
especially exteriors. Yeah, that's a must watch. I
Yeah.
think, if you have any interest in horror,
I have
than
to
Christmas, or
revisit.
even if you know.
No, it's killing me. My memory is terrible. And this movie, Christmas Evil, I didn't see until I was an adult, so it's not
Yeah,
burned in
same.
the way a lot of other movies are. But did he all? Is this
Yeah.
the one where he keeps also visiting the little peep show in the window? Is that this?
Oh no,
That's another
that Don't
Christmas
Open Until
horror, isn't it?
Christmas.
Yeah, that might be it. Yeah, that sounds right.
Mm,
Yeah, because
yeah,
I think I blend those together. I have trouble extricating Christmas Evil from some of the others, but yeah, I'm gonna have to revisit it.
yeah.
I haven't seen it in probably 15, 20 years or something. So
Oh, it's aged beautifully. If you feel like springing for it, the I think it's Vinegar Syndrome, the Blu-ray. I mean, I think it's Vinegar Syndrome. If it's not, it's one of those other companies that does like gorgeous transfers, where they put more attention into the film than, giant movies.
yeah,
And, it just looks beautiful, and which makes it even better and also kind of worse, because like it looks so nice. You kind of feel like it should be on a videotape you find in the gutter, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. That's definitely part of the appeal. Sometimes is you want a little bit of grime in the media itself, but
Yeah,
also
for
these
sure.
movies getting restored is pretty great because a lot of them, the prints that are out there are just almost unwatchable. So companies like Vinegar Syndrome and Synapse, who
Yep.
released Infinite
Yep.
Santa 8000, do these awesome renditions of these movies that are loved by the cult, the really small groups that will buy them and treasure them and share them with their friends and families.
Yep. Yep. It's huge. It's one of the best things about those independent labels, like you said, like ours and Vinegar Syndrome, Shop Factory, to see these films that before this were only on, you know, really bad formats if they were out at all.
Yeah.
These are living history. Not to mention great movies that people like us want to see. And if you can't find it this way, they'll go to any lengths you can to find anything.
Yeah, that's true. When it's one of these that really impressed you and left that indelible mark on your brain and your art and everything else, you want to have that record and you want it to be as clear as possible.
Yeah,
It'd be
sure.
fun if on these they did like if they always included like the worst print they could find
Yeah,
on
right,
on the
totally.
yeah, they're like, here's the worst print we found. You can watch the whole movie that way, and then here's the version we cleaned it up. I feel like there should be a standard feature on some of these older
That would be
movies,
interesting.
like
But I think
VHS
like something,
transfers.
right? Well, because it does help sometimes. Like the original Nightmare on Elm Street, I saw on a crummy videotape, and I have a Blu-ray version, which is beautiful. But that's one where I feel like the effects are almost better,
Mm-hmm.
with a lot of grain. And it's not that they're bad effects. There's one or two that haven't aged quite as well, like the arms coming out with really good fidelity. You can see the mechanics a little bit, but that's a pretty tiny criticism. That movie did amazing stuff with the effects. But I feel like when you have that extra grain, it kind of ties everything together a
Yeah,
little bit.
some call it a
Texas Chainsaw's
patina.
like that, What's that?
I said some people call it a patina, like on an antique, where if you watch, I'm a big fan of Antiques Roadshow, and if you watch
Hmm.
that, there's always the person who found this item and is like, "Well, I cleaned it up," and they're like, "Well, you removed all the patina that made this a valuable item, like all of the age that was on it, the green on the bronze and the coppers and oxidation and just." Little things, and you never know, like some things they want cleaned up and some things they don't, but films are one of those things that's so subjective that one audience member is going to be married to the grimy version they saw when they were a kid, which for me, Texas Chainsaw was that way. The first time I saw that was on a really bad tape,
Yeah, same.
and that made it more scary to me. I was lucky to see Nightmare on Elm Street in the theater, and then when I
Hmm.
saw it on tape, it was that 4:3 cut down too, where you couldn't even read the credits in the beginning; they were all cut
Yeah.
off, and it's crazy to see the different iterations and formats of what we consider classic films now too, like what they were willing to cut out of frame and just to get it
I
out to
know.
market.
I know. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's a weird industry.
Yeah, very strange.
So we have one left, right? Drum roll.
We do. This is the hardest, man. There's so many movies. I'm going to give a really quick qualifier before I move to the actual one. What else can be said about Christmas Vacation? I think it's the funniest, most heartfelt
Yes.
film around Christmas ever made. But it's not my number one, but I have to say it because I have incredible memories watching it with my family, stringing cranberries and popcorn for the tree, watching it with my parents, my sister, now watching it with my wife and my kid while we're wrapping presents. Like,
what does Jasper think of it?
Oh, it's hilarious.
Yeah,
He loves it.
I love that he's still like, it works for everybody. I think it's an amazing movie.
Oh yeah, no, it's joke a minute. We still quote it year round. It's the gift that keeps giving the whole year.
Yeah.
See, just quote it right there. But the real one has to be the Claymation Christmas special, which I don't know if that many people have seen. Have you seen it, Freddie?
Well, is this not the same one that had the California raisins in it? Is it?
Yes,
it is that one. Yes,
that's the one.
It was great.
Yeah,
underrated, and it should still be aired. I don't understand what happened, other than I know there was a little controversy over the racist element of the California raisins, but I think people were kind of like just didn't know how to compute it, because there was definitely no ill intention or any type of like in the making of it. You know, nobody was impersonating these characters. These were real singers and performers that were doing like a legitimate, like, awesome little musical, you know, for TV.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, I think that's long past. I'm pretty sure it's legal stuff. I think Will Vinton Studios got bought up by something else. I think it turned into Latka, LA, or how you pronounce it. The ones that do
Box Trolls,
the Kubo and the Two Strings and the Paranorman. I think it's this. And don't quote me. I think there's a lineage from that Will Vinton to that. But I think it's a sad legal history, you know, as far as his films are concerned. But I love this because when I was a kid, my sister, who's 3 years younger than me, you know, when you're a kid and you're waiting for Christmas, it's like time to stand still. You know, it's just takes forever. And the day before, you know, Christmas Eve day, you know, we're done doing what we have to do, unaware that my parents are running around getting ready for everything, because that's what you do when you're an adult with a family, which I know now. But then you're sitting there staring at the clock. So we taped it off TV, which is the only way to see it. And we watched it over and over and over again. Like, you know, when you're a kid, you can just get fixated on something and just keep doing it. Like, this is like 10, 7, 13 and 10, 16 and 13, you know, like, we always, with our 3-year age difference, we were always just kind of moving up, but we still did it. Sorry, I muted myself for a second. But for aside from that, it really captures the different kinds of ways to celebrate Christmas. It has really fun segments. Like, there's a great one with we singing "We Three Kings" with a bunch of like singing camels, and it's really funny.
Vividly, that was fantastic.
Oh, it's amazing. Speaking too of not having characters walk, the claymation in that, all the characters shuffle, and my hunch is that they were so top heavy, because if you look, a lot of their legs are really skinny, and then the body's on top with the clay. And clay is pretty heavy. I've worked with it, and even if the clay is built over something light, you know, it's still, I'm sure, very difficult. But I love animation. I've always loved animation. And there's another great one. There's Joy to the World, which is done by pushing clay on glass.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, it has a really abstract look to it. Just like really cool. And yeah, it's only about half hour long, or I guess probably 24, 27 minutes, you know, back then with commercials. I think most of it's available on YouTube. I found one on Vimeo years ago, but it was 3 seconds out of sync, which is frustrating.
Yeah.
You can buy a DVD of it. That's how I got it. But I really encourage people to seek it out. It's great for kids. You know, it's very charming. It's very much 1980s. And the amount of work that went into it, it's really just fascinating. And now that I'm an animator myself, I mean, I have been for a while, seeing what they did and what they wanted to pull off, it's just amazing. All the tiny little sets. There's a giant group scene where it's like 60 characters singing at once. Wow. It's like, oh my God, that's so much work.
Yeah. And those raisins, man, They were everywhere when we were kids too. Like, because it wasn't just this Christmas special. For those younger listeners, the California Raisins, I think, were part of like the Raisin Council or something, right? Wasn't it like a push
Yeah,
to sell
yeah,
raisins? So
it was. Yeah.
yeah, it kind of came out of that. But then we fell in love with these characters as kids. We in the '80s we were not as cynical as we are now. If something could come to us through an ad, and we'd hold it as dear as a classic piece of like story or whatever, then the California Raisins are like that. You know, I would also say that Jim Varney playing Ernest P. Worrell was kind of that same, because he came up doing ads for different dairies in the country as that character before they made all the
Oh,
movies and stuff. So Ernest was a straight to the camera. He was addressing a character called Vern, and that burned into our brains from the commercials. And then Ernest Goes to Camp and all that came out, and it just he blew up. But these things came out of Madison Avenue ad type firms, but there was still some art to that stuff then. I mean, I don't know if there is so much anymore. We don't see as many ads as we used to, but yeah, the California Raisins, Geico Caveman might be the closest thing.
I know. I was thinking that, and yet that had a TV show that failed, and I think a lot of it is that cynicism. Like, and another good example of the '80s where we welcomed being like marketed to. I mean, look at Freddy versus Jason.
Mm-hmm.
Just like they weren't just mass marketed. It was everywhere. Like, and in retrospect, two serial killers being marketed towards kids is actually a little creepy. And a Wes Craven's New Nightmare touches on that a little bit, which I think is pretty clever. But I think like everything was mass marketed. I mean, He-Man, Ninja Turtles, like any of those shows. I mean, He-Man was based off of toys. Like
Yeah.
they had the toys first and they made sure the animation matched it
Yeah.
and handed it over. I think that was Hanna-Barbera, or it might have been Filmation.
I think
I can't
Filmation,
remember.
I'm pretty sure. And they
Was
had
it?
the little comic books that came with the action figures to kind of were basically the storyboards to come of what you were going to get later down the road.
Yeah. And it was great. I feel like these days there's definitely some cynicism with that. And I know from my own son who's 12, they don't have that kind of universal television based experience. It's more based off of YouTube, and then just whatever memes just tend to take off worldwide. And I guess that's not that different because, things have always come into the public consciousness and just hit kids in particular in a certain way. But it's interesting too, because like we watch The Simpsons and he doesn't get TV culture. Like there's so many jokes on that about, turning off the TV or becoming zombies, or like we listen to Jane's Addiction or some other band that talks about TV culture. And it's like, it just doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, it
It's
doesn't exist
really
anymore.
different.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Appointment viewing and all that. We like long for that sometimes because of it was an easy connection to people, whether it be, your neighbors or coworker, that you were all watching the same stuff. So you could at least have an end there usually. And now you really got to work a little harder, when most people don't, but you do have to work a little harder to get to know people, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is interesting. Or the idea that like Key and Peele once did a great sketch about four people out to dinner trying to talk about pop culture. And there's always one show that someone's behind on and doesn't want any spoilers. So they can't talk about anything,
Yeah.
as opposed to like, if you miss the latest episode of X-Files, or even The Simpsons, which doesn't have as much continuity, like you don't know when you'd see it again. You might
Right.
never see it again,
For real.
or SNL or something,
Yeah, that's the truth. Ephemeral, I think, is the word.
Yes. Good SAT word.
Yeah.
I like that. Learn something new every day.
So Infinite Santa 8000 makes a good Christmas present. You've got time. You've got a couple of weeks, right? At least 3 weeks.
Yeah.
To get this for your stocking stuffer. Director's Cut, Infinite Santa 8000, Synapse Films, synapsefilms.com. Where else should we be pointing people, Mike?
Sure. So it's coming out on Tubi on December 10th, which is super exciting. I think that's the absolute perfect place for a film like ours. That's where people go to watch weird movies, and
Love
ours
it.
is very weird. Yeah. And we might be on a couple other streaming places. I haven't heard any word. So once the 10th hits, if you're looking for it, check your local or whatever streaming service you use, Roku, Google TV, the good old internet. whatever you're doing. And if you like it, please spread the word. I mean, this film has always been a funny little thing. Our fans are completely diehard. It does not appeal to everybody, which is totally fine. The ones it does go nuts for it, but we don't have an advertising budget. This thing only works from word of mouth. So if you like it, tell your friends, pass it on, reach out to us. And it has 854 kills in it.
I didn't realize that. I mean, I knew there were a lot.
I didn't know it either. A YouTube channel called Carnage Counts did a count a few years ago. This was the theatrical cut, so who only knows how many it is now. We don't think we cut any out. I know we added at least one. And he figured it out, and I didn't even know, and it was 9.085 kills per minute.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, no wonder it took 3 years to do.
The most violent Christmas movie ever made.
I mean, it must be, right? Yeah. Like, I certainly put that as a badge of honor. Greg Anston and I sitting there making each individual one blow up,
Oh, man, this was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing your favorite Christmas movies with us, Michael. And that's Michael Neel, director, creator of Infinite Santa 8000. Also, Greg Anson. Greg, if you're out there, hello, Greg.
I'm sure he says hello. I know he does, actually. He can't be on today, but he did say hello.
He's a great guy. I like him a lot.
Yeah, he is.
Well, I guess get out there, start your shopping. You know where to find it. Bye, Michael. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Season's bleeding. Ho, ho, ho.